Hello, and welcome to episode 199 of Prose. This week, take a second look at the oft-vilified Herod the Great of biblical fame and infamy. Please consider heading to prosepodcast.com, our one-stop shop for all things prose. There you can find links to social media, the episodes, a shop for swag, the show's Patreon, and more. On social media, like and share away. Most importantly, please do consider subscribing, rating, and or reviewing wherever you grab your podcasts. Thanks for listening. Let's get to this tale, shall we? This week we have The Boy. Enjoy.
The Boy, an original short story by Jared I. McGee. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search diligently for the young child. And when ye have found him, bring me word again, that I may come and worship him also. The book of Matthew, chapter 2, verse 8, King James Version. For a very long time, Herod had thought about his legacy. Like all rulers, he had desires to live on long after his time on the mortal coil was finished. Sometimes he thought this incurable vanity that was part and parcel to the human experience. Sometimes he thought this an innate quality bestowed upon humanity by God himself, so that his lowly creatures would do something more than scrape the earth and harm one another. So they would look to the stars and be inspired to do great works in the time allotted them. As Herod aged, he began to think that both of these were true. Like most things in life, the truth was somewhere in the fields of gray that any given concepts, philosophy, practice, religion, anything had surrounding it. Rarely, if ever, were blacks and whites actually starkly so. Rather, the weak-willed and the feeble-minded sought out those extremes as creature comforts in an intimidating and often cruel world. Thinking back to his youth and how he'd accomplished all that he had, Herod thought not for the first time that maybe cruelty was a very necessary means to bigger, better, greater ends. Certainly, he and Phasael would have never caught the attention of the lumbering Roman oaf Mark Antony had they not been willing to sacrifice when sacrifices were necessary. That they had to kill and loot and rape and generally harm in order to rein in the excesses and hammer out the weaknesses of their people and this region were of little matter in the grand scheme of history. Surely people far, far down the line of human history would understand that these were necessities. And wouldn't history be kind and see his own sacrifices? Doris and Antipater were off in unknown corners of the wild, far from him and his love, far from him and his protections. But that could not be avoided. Mariamne was the key to ensuring his senatorial appointment as king of the Jews actually stuck. That Mariamne was divinely beautiful was just an added bonus, of course. Herod knew, though, that he would sacrifice her in a moment. He would sacrifice anyone and everyone to ensure that his name lived on and that his kingdom lived on. Even if said kingdom had the Roman seal on everything it did, this still allowed it to go on and even flourish. He knew he was making the right decisions. He had to be. Why else would God or the gods or whatever it was that ruled this universe allow him to be where he was, allow him to be who he was? Religion. That was too often at the forefront of his mind these days. The Romans did not approve of the singular overarching God of the Jews. They thought of this practice as small-minded and backward, limiting even. Doris was somewhat God-fearing. Mariamne was, but Herod thought that piety only lasted as far as Mariamne needed to be exalted as ruler before the eyes of the unwashed, blathering masses that desperately clung to their beliefs. Not that all religious men were unwashed and blathering. No. They could be as scheming and dangerous as anyone in the wide world. The Sanhedrin was proof enough of that. Time and time again, those self-congratulating old fools had rebuffed him for his lifestyle and what they considered his lack of commitment to the faith. Yet, he knew for a fact that many of them visited the whores in the back alleys, accepted bribes for votes in one's favor, fondled and fornicated with the young boys that acted as pages in their council meetings. At least Herod had the courage to bring his whores into the palace openly, to accept bribes while remaining uncaring toward all parties involved, to limit his couplings with his wife's handmaids, not openly defying what those sages claimed was God's natural law. Hypocrites, snakes, thieves of youth. They would never be great. They would only bask in his greatness, hoping to water it down or to steal enough for themselves. And that's all what had him here talking with these three learned men. Apparently, they'd been studying the charts and the movements of the heavenly bodies, and they felt that they'd discerned something from all that chaos. Supposedly, they'd come across a special new star in the night sky that heralded the birth of the true King of the Jews, and they were seeking him out in the backward hamlet of Bethlehem. The true King of the Jews. Though Herod was well practiced at keeping his countenance neutral, no matter what news he was giving or receiving, he felt his own mouth tighten, felt his own brow knit ever so slightly. The audacity of these self-proclaimed scholars was almost too much. However, if they had seen this portend, there was a chance that others might have seen and subsequently interpreted it the same way. Roman assistance or no, he'd not be on the throne much longer if he allowed such a potential threat to go unchecked. The Senate had given him broad latitude as to what he could or could not do to protect his interests, and therefore their interests here in Judea. So he would take care of this rather easily. Though it was quite well known that he was a bit less than pious, he allowed himself to react with great interest. In fact, he tried for unfettered joy, despite his initial tightness at the reception of the news. He proclaimed them blessed geniuses, bringing such wonderful tidings. The Messiah, the prophesied, the true King of the Jews? How grateful he was to be living in such wonderful times, to be able to see lore and holy scripture come to life before him. After going on like that for quite some time, he thought it prudent to plead with the three magi, begging them to go forth and find this newborn with all of his blessings, bringing the child and his parents' goodwill from the current king, who would, of course, be more than happy to hold the throne for the child and deal with the Romans for him until he was old enough to come into his earthly kingdom. Herod called forth for food and wine and incense. He celebrated with these men, telling them to head out as soon as possible after their feast, and to please bring the babe back to the capital where he could be properly protected and could be properly worshipped by Herod himself. The celebrations were short but raucous, though the three men were conservative with his wine and uninterested in his women. That might prove to be a problem, or at least a bad sign, if they were the type of pious fools that so often troubled him. Still, he smiled and joyously cheersed this good fortune, and sent the men on their way with such fanfare and riches that surely they could have no doubts of just how sincere Herod was. Doris came back to him unbidden. The memory of the happiness that she and he had shared. She bore him his first son, after all. How could any man bear naught but apathy to the woman who gave the greatest gift to him? Yet, when the time had come, he'd push them out of his kingdom and out of his life, all but ensuring a life of hardship and pain for them. Ex-queens and rival claimants to thrones had dangerous lives no matter where they were. But alone, without protection, Doris would have turned to whoring by now, and Antipater to thieving and maybe mercenary work when he was fully of age. Those that he'd loved, that he thought he still did love in some way, he'd thrown out to be used as the world saw fit. So this claimant babe, this unnamed child, had been declared the Messiah, the king by stargazing men so disconnected from reality that they thought those lights gave them messages? How long before others took up that call? Where that infant's banner came to topple Herod and his control? In a world so full of hate and pain and death, there were no innocents. Even this newborn child could cause the slaughter of entire nations, if he really was what these men were trying to make him out to be. Herod shivered. His entire life spent trying to bring about a solidified nation, peace, and his own everlasting renown that could live on far past him, and in a moment it was all in the greatest jeopardy it had faced in some time. He thought of the faces of those three men and knew without a doubt that they could not bring the child to him. No. They were intelligent men of the world. They knew full well what must happen. Without thinking any more on it, and being fully resolved, Herod called for his scribe. He quickly barked out that all newly born male babes and male offspring up to the age of 2 in the vicinity of Bethlehem should be culled, for the good of the nation, for the good of the population. He sealed the decree and sat back on his throne. For a very long time, Herod had thought about his legacy. He was already being called Herod the Great after all. And tonight, he'd secured the auspices of history and his people. Any other course of action would have been folly. He smiled and knew that he would be remembered, congratulating himself on his wisdom and foresight. Thank you for listening to The Boy. All the sounds behind this track were taken from freesound.org. User Tom Leja created the sounds on the stringed Sarjiha. User Spidervis is responsible for the dark surged sound in E. User Notumbug painstakingly recorded then uploaded the tribal drum sample, and user Gopalkodori recorded the Turkish flute sounds. All the tracks are being used under Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 unported licenses, except the Turkish flute, which is being used under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial 3.0 unported license. That does it for this week on Prose. Until next time, go out and make a few new epic stories of your own.
Unlike most weeks, next time is right around the corner with some holiday specials. Until then, I do hope that you'll love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is always stranger than fiction. Thank you so much for listening.